about us, and it's time to bow down. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Bow Down. Dennis, it's so great to see you. It's so great. Of course, we've been chatting for almost an hour at this point. There's always so much that we can talk about, but I'm so excited to dive into what we have planned for today.
Me too, Reese. So great to see you, looking so lovely as always. You look radiant and glorious. So always a pleasure. And yes, I almost wish our listeners could have heard what we were chatting about, because there were so many great things. We were all over the place, but and in the most awesome way possible. But we have some really cool stuff to share today, and really curious to see where it goes. So
absolutely, me
as always,
too.
Lovely to be here.
Okay, so for listeners, we kind of mentioned last week that we were thinking about doing this series on biblical womanhood, and today is going to be the very first episode of that. And we thought, who better to kick off, or what better to kick off this series than with Mother Mary and the Madonna, the archetype of the Madonna, and that really is the epitome of biblical womanhood. So we're going to start here today, see what comes up, chat about it. And I think we also have the intention of, once we feel like we've really explored the expanse of this series on biblical womanhood, return back to this archetype, to the figure of Mother Mary, and see how maybe our ideas have changed, how we've changed, how our position on femininity, womanhood, and biblical womanhood have shifted. So yeah, we are going to dive into Mother Mary. Dennis, I'm curious how when you were younger, how Mary was presented to you as a figure, and also how you went about preparing to brush up for this episode.
Sure. Yeah, so it's kind of interesting. I went to Catholic school through second grade. My mother was really evangelical Christian, but had been reared Catholic and had spent most of her life Catholic. She had only become saved, 10 years, or right when I was born. So from a personal perspective, there wasn't really a focus on Mary at all, other than somebody in the Bible. Versus sort of the Catholic education, the religion classes, things of that nature, which obviously put a much higher emphasis on Mary. You know, the Hail Mary, like learning the Hail Mary.
Right.
The Our Father was fine. You know, we did, but the Hail Mary wasn't something that was ever really talked about in my family. So for me, it was, I never really put much emphasis on the virgin birth or any of that for me. So it's kind of interesting to explore that. Just for me, how I prepared was really to read through the relevant biblical passages, of course, where Mary appears with and really Luke is the primary, but also she appears in Matthew as well. As well as just seeing what else was out there. So doing a little bit of just reading and reflection in terms of different ways of looking at Mary and the Madonna. So how about you? How did you prepare?
Yeah. It was really interesting because there's one, this is going to sound like a tangent, but it's relevant. There's one there's one magic shop in all of Florence, and it is a 45-minute walk from my apartment. And there is a bus. I could have hopped on the bus, but I was like, you know what? It was a Sunday morning, and I was like, we're preparing to do this episode. Like, this just feels like I want to go on this walk and reflect, and I've been doing a lot of introspection, so we'll just walk and almost make like a little mini pilgrimage to this magic shop. And so I ended up wandering, and I got a little lost, and then wandered my way back, found it, and they had a bunch of different styles of tarot decks, and I have my Rider-Waite tarot deck that I love, but I really more prefer getting different decks that are different oracle decks that aren't necessarily just the classic tarot, but or different messages. And there was this one that stood out to me because it said it was based entirely in Florentine lithographs. And so all different lithographs that had been made and created by Florentine artists. And I was like, that's beautiful. And it was called the Divine Light Oracle. And I was like, I'm sold. And so, of course, I stocked up on some sage and some Palo Santo and some black salt. And then I got these oracle cards too. I get home and I do my little blessing, get to know them kind of thing with my cards. And then I start exploring them. It is the Mother Mary lithograph set where every single card depicts a different iteration of the Mother Mary in each of her different names that are said through the prayer of Our Lady Loretto, which I believe is one of the places where it's said that Mary may have come from. And so in Catholic tradition, there's this prayer that prays to, I want to say, 56 different titles of Mary. So you're like Mary, Mother of God, Virgin of Virgins, the Purest Mother, like all of these different titles that she has. And so I'm just flipping through these cards. They're gorgeous artwork. But also I was like, I've been researching Mother Mary, and then of course drawn to these cards, and it was just one of those perfect moments of synchronicity.
That's lovely. Like, yeah, no coincidences, right? It was meant to be
at all, right? And I was like, well, let's do a little poll just for some funsies. And the first card that jumped out at me was Mary, the Virgin of Virgins, but it's written in Italian on these cards, and so it says the Virgo of Virgos, and Virgo is my sun sign as well. And I've always kind of had this affinity for not necessarily the Madonna archetype, but for Mary as a figure, as she's presented in the Bible. And I don't really know why, because I actually have a lot of disagreement with the way that she is framed through typical traditional Christian narratives. So it was just this really cool moment. And then, so I got to explore a little bit of that. And then also through doing a bit more reading, returning to the Bible, I went on and listened to Bart Ehrman, who is a biblical text scholar. I believe he teaches at UNC, but he's one of the preeminent scholars on the Bible, and he has a really great podcast all about biblical truth. So I listened to a few episodes of him talking about the virgin birth specifically. Yeah, and then of course I dived into how the Oedipus complex is related in the Maiden Mother Crone trilogy, the Madonna horror archetype, and all of the fun stuff that comes out and about when you start dealing with all of this.
Yeah, absolutely. That's I love Bert Ehrman. He's actually he was the first scholar I listened to once as I started to I wouldn't even call it deconstruct my faith at that point, but this was when I was younger and in my probably in my 20s, I think, and he really opened my eyes to some things, and particularly around how the Bible came together, and
right.
how, and really sort of laid some facts that I wasn't ready to accept at the time, but they sort of seeped into my subconscious, I think. So yeah, that's what were your? I mean, maybe we'll start there, just from a scholarly perspective. What were your takeaways from listening to him?
Yeah, I think I really wanted to dive into some scholarship around the virgin birth because, of course, in biblical literature, there's disagreement across sects about whether or not the Bible is literal or metaphorical or allegorical or a mix thereof. And I think you hear virgin birth and it's kind of taken for granted in Christian circles that it's like, oh yeah, well, of course, Jesus was born from a virgin, right? And actually looking at the scholarship really lends some credence to like, okay, how would that happen? How would that be possible? where do you, as if you're someone who holds the Bible to be the ultimate truth, where do you justify this? At what point does faith come in? At what point do you have like a certain theodicy to make it make sense, right? And I really loved that Dr. Ehrman started with the roots in like Greco-Roman tradition, and that we see a lot of quote unquote virgin births with different gods throughout tradition, right? That Mary actually isn't the only one. Whether or not you want to call those true virgin births, I think is up for debate. Probably the most famous one is Aphrodite being born from walking out of the sea, right? That she is a daughter of Poseidon and, I'm forgetting the other one, but she is not born in typical human fashion, right? There's also all sorts of myths about gods taking on mortal form or the form of animals, and that is how demigods and Heracles and all sorts of other heroes and gods and minor gods are born unto the world, both born and born with an E. But Mary is the first one out of this succession of virgin births that is fully 100% human and becomes pregnant in the traditional human physical sense. But even within that, Matthew and Luke tell very different stories about this. And one thing that he mentioned that I thought was really, really fascinating was that the original translation of one of the words that says virgin was actually Alma, which means young woman, which of course doesn't necessarily mean virgin. When you use the word maiden, there is this kind of connotation with virginity, with purity, but it doesn't necessarily follow that you must be. So I think even in the beginning, there are just seeds of doubt in this idea, because not only are we looking back not just at the original Hebrew for a lot, but a lot of the Gospels are inspired by reading the Septuagint, which is the Greek translation of the original Hebrew of the New Testament, or Old Testament, excuse me. And even within this first iteration of translation that the Gospels are being inspired by, and the idea that, I believe it's Isaiah 7, I wrote it down. Yes, it's Isaiah 7:14, that Mary has to be a virgin because that is what is predicted, that the salvation will come as born through a virgin. And so when the story of Mary is being revealed through the Gospels, it's already we're starting from a place of cloudedness, of mystery. And I think there's something really important about being really specific with what these words mean, because I think there's something deeply harmful about continuing the idea that Mary was literally a young woman who got pregnant magically, because that's something that would have been extremely, extremely dangerous to a young woman in that time. She could have been killed easily. And in her village, like that, it just couldn't happen. And the fact that this is praised as something like it's the ultimate purity, right? The ultimate idea of womanhood is that you can mother without damaging the purity of having to have sex. That is kind of the epitome of the Madonna. And so I think getting really real with the realities of what that would mean for an actual young woman is important. And whether or not Mary did have sex or not in order to get pregnant within your belief system should not change, in my opinion, your faith. It's like faith, I think, has to come into that at a certain point, because that's kind of besides the point. It should be besides the point whether or not she had sex. That does not need to be this dirty thing that it is turned into. And I think we see how already from the very inception of this mistranslation, misunderstanding, and projection onto the Bible, mapping external worldviews onto the Bible, changes the societal expectation around womanhood, like from the jump. So
I think that's absolutely. And yeah, in that whole passage in Isaiah 7 is, I mean, if you read the tense of it, it's not about a future event at all. It's actually the prophet Isaiah is saying to Hezekiah, hey, look at this woman here. She's pregnant. By the time this boy is old enough, you'll have your salvation. But that when the writers of the Septuagint, that wasn't as meaningful because it had already happened. So they changed they changed it. That's whoever the writer of the Gospel Matthew was, who was most certainly probably not named Matthew, and certainly wasn't a contemporary of Jesus, because we know Matthew was written, several generations likely after Yeshua would have been executed. But yeah, I think you're right. I mean, putting aside the historical accuracy, the veracity of there was sex, there wasn't sex. I mean, I think we can agree that the story and what it tells is where the power is in the story, and to take. But I think it is good to put that historical context around. Somebody misread something, and it's like, oh, cool, I'm creating this mythos. So this and now we take it as quote unquote gospel truth, which is interesting. And I loved what you said though in terms of the dangers. That's something that I was thinking about as well. And as I first looked at this or thought about it, it's like, geez, did Mary even give consent? Right? Because if she hadn't given consent, then that's akin to rape, essentially. But she does. And when Gabriel appears to her, she says famously, I'm the handmaiden of the Lord, let it be done to me according to your word. And you could very well interpret that, I think, as submission, right? Mm-hmm. And I think it has been. But I'm almost saying, well, what if you flip the script to your point, in that she was agreeing to do something that could have gotten her stoned to death, for certain. She wasn't accepting her fate, but rather she was choosing to participate in something revolutionary. She wasn't saying yes to God, but saying yes to being sort of the center of the most important story in that tradition of this Messiah, of this Savior, salvation. And in a society where women had very little voice, her consent, her voice mattered. And to me, I actually think that's kind of groundbreaking when you look at it that way. And instead of looking at her as meek, you see the power that her voice, her consent, her yes had. Now, we don't know what would have happened if she hadn't said yes.
Right.
But she did say yes. And in that, she to me, I see that, at least one interpretation for me is reclaiming that power. And having that. How does that land with you?
Yeah, no, I really, really love that, because there is something. I love the word that you used, revolutionary, right? And I suppose, God could have found another virgin, but it was chosen to be Mary, and she did say yes. She took ownership of it. And I think she, in and of herself, is the miracle in this, right? It's like her being who she is the miracle. And you often hear people today say, the miracle of childbirth. It is quite literally insane that a full human being grows inside of a woman. Why does virginity need to be a piece of this miracle? It's like, that is already so profoundly powerful that you are able to create life. Like, that is so powerful. And I really love that reframe, that this is an active choice that she is making, not just a yes, but an enthusiastic yes, let me be in the story. It almost makes me think of the end of Hamilton, where Eliza has her solo moment, and you're kind of left with this idea of like, okay, which Hamilton is it really about? Is this story about Alexander Hamilton, or is it about Eliza? Because she is the one who was able to allow for this story to be told. Will they tell your story, right? And it's like, will they tell Mary's story? It's become Jesus' story. It's just as much in every right Mary's story.
I agree. Yeah, no, totally. And I think we see it again in Luke, and when she visits Elizabeth, her cousin, I think it is, and
Yeah.
bursts out into this song. I think it's called the Magnificat, I guess. And again, I'm not all that familiar. I with and it's definitely much more, I think, of a Catholic tradition, especially. But and I wrote this down, so I'm just going to read it. He has cast down the mighty from their thrones and lifted up the lowly. He has filled the hungry with good things and sent the rich away empty. And again, if you think about that, I think we tend to think, oh, it's beautiful poetry or, but really I would go so far as to say it's a revolutionary proclamation. There's social justice in there, power reversal. And yeah, I think we miss that sometimes because I think we're focusing, we tend to focus on the meekness again, going back to this, the virgin, the submissiveness, the do what you're told. But when you actually read what she says, what she proclaims, what you can almost say she prophesies.
Yeah.
To me, that's not meek at all. Though we've kind of sandpapered it down and not really thought about it to make it look meek. So again, I agree completely in terms of, I like the Hamilton reference in terms of this is Mary's story as well.
Yeah.
Even though we tend to forget that a lot of times, and I think Catholicism maybe more so than say mainstream evangelical Christianity holds on to that in one way, and so it's there's the good and the bad, right? There's a yin and the yang in terms of yes, they revere. There's a reverence towards Mary. I don't know though that it's for the right reasons, and I don't know how often that's seen, right?
Yeah. Well, and I think too, it's interesting to think about like Marian cults or Marian sects that come about that there is, at least for me, and I know within the like Christian Catholic dichotomy, Protestant Catholic, I should say, dichotomy, of like idolatry. Where does that come into play? And in worship, like what is the line there? And within that, one thing that came up a lot as I was researching, and I'm so glad it did, was the idea of the Black Madonna as well. And there are several statues and paintings that depict Madonna and the baby Emmanuel as darker skinned, which one, historically they would be, being where they are from geographically. But also there is this, like you said, it imbues this social justice kind of idea into it of like the weak becoming strong, owning their power, stepping into everything that they have. But then this added layer of like spiritual shadow, which we've discussed a few times as well, and what a Black Madonna would actually mean and actually be in this way. I love what you said about the yin and the yang with like, there's good reason and bad reason to worship different things. And I think we see that across religions, right? Religions are extremely powerful in terms of bringing about great good and horrific bad. And so this, I don't know, what comes up for you in this dichotomy of the Mother Mary being pure as snow, but then there's also this idea of the Black Madonna too, that is powerful, that is shadow, and is quite literally visually depicted darker.
Yeah, it's it's interesting, and I think it plays into that, the I think Freud called it sort of the Madonna versus the whore complex too.
Yeah.
Is the Black Madonna, is that the darker side, the whore, the harlot, that personification of woman being, a promiscuous, and that's evil, that's the dark side versus the light side. That's what comes up immediately for me. Mm-hmm. And I think we don't reflect on that enough. I think people are very easy to just dismiss the idea, or a Black Jesus, a Black Mary, anything if you're from an Eurocentric America for
right.
Eurocentric culture, that that's just a that's just a fantasy, or that's
Yeah.
that's an abrogation of what's real. But what does it mean symbolically? You're right. The dark side of femininity and of being a woman. And you even the idea of a virgin birth, right, is this idea that, well, you give life, but you're not impure because you didn't have sex,
Right.
as if somehow having sex makes you impure, which is something that I think a lot of women today struggle with. This whole promise ring and purity ring culture, and trying to fight hormones and being all this guilt around intimacy and love and sex and desire, thinking desires are bad. I think it sort of it plays to I think it plays together very nicely when you bring it up that way. And also this idea of, again, going back to the social justice aspect. I mean, the readings of this, from what I've read anyway, like in the 1980s, public readings of Mary's song, this Magnificat, were banned in places because they did promote social justice. Like I think in Guatemala, for example, like it wasn't allowed because, and again, it just it subverts. It just changes the way I think when I look at things that way. And that's it opens my eyes to things that really I haven't necessarily considered before.
Yeah.
How powerful that really is. And so in doing this research and thinking about it, it opens something up to say, wow, I think it shines a light into my blind spots. Blind spots that I've held culturally, religiously, and so it's but when you talk about it, it's like, wow, you're right. Like all of these things can be true.
Right.
And can you hold space for both the virgin and the promiscuity? Can you hold space for those in one container?
The nuance within that, I completely agree. And I think within being able to hold both the Madonna and the whore, right? To hold the societal ramifications plus the spiritual ones is kind of the difficulty of being a human being in a lot of ways. It's like we have to hold dichotomies all the time. And one thing that came up for me as you were talking about this is being able to see the Bible as true and untrue at the same time too. And I think that was something that happened kind of at the end of my deconstruction and the beginning of my reconstruction, but also like later on down the line in reconstruction as well. That was, the Bible is just a text, like any other text. And as someone who was undoing my Christianity and still does not consider myself to be a Christian, there are still deep truths in the Bible. And I really like looking at it as almost like when I read The Hunger Games, right? Katniss is a powerful, powerful character. She is fallible. She makes mistakes, but I 100% stand by her values of standing up against tyranny, of fighting for what she believes in, of trying to be a strong woman. And the dynamics of like her femininity within a war setting too is a big undertone in that book. And it's like, I think we can hold the Bible in the same way as well, regardless of your belief and where faith comes into play again. We can still see and be inspired by the truths that are within this while dissecting and being really specific about the harmful things that are mapped onto it and that are built into it as well.
I agree. And I think it stems, well, for me, and because, similar type journey. And when you assume that the Bible is the divine word of God and infallible and perfect and everything in there was it wasn't men wrote it, men may have men may have wrote it, but it was really God who wrote it. That's a limiting view.
Right.
Because you all of a sudden now have to do all of these mental gymnastics to convince yourself that this thing that doesn't make sense, well, it really does make sense if you twist it in this knot or you twist it up in this way. And so if you let go of that and you say, what does this mean to me? What can I take from this? And also examine, what did they mean by it? What were they trying to achieve? What was the author trying to say? But what do I make from it? What meaning do I give it? Because ultimately we place our meaning on whatever text we read, the Bible, the Hunger Games, Ulysses, whatever it is, we ultimately place our meaning. And the question is do you want to give your power to somebody else to tell you what that meaning is? Or do you want to choose it for yourself? And I think a lot of us, it was dangerous for me growing up to try to choose it for myself.
Yes.
That felt unsafe. And so I think you shy away from unsafe things, especially when you're young and brought into this very, very early in life. One thing that I was thinking of as you were talking was this idea, again, how, going back to interpretation, I think while the church and have used this story, her virginity, right, to go back to that, the virginity side, to promote sexual purity, right? Mm-hmm. Oh, be pure. Maybe there's another. Here's another possible interpretation. What if her story suggests that women's identities can't be defined by their relationship to men? So she experienced. If you take the story of the virgin birth at face value, assume it's true, or you read the story for what it is. She experienced motherhood without male sexual dominance, which is something that's very revolutionary in that culture. I mean, even today, frankly, but there especially, where women were property. I mean, the Bible, the Old Testament is very clear that women are property in many different ways. And so what if rather than seeing her virginity as, abstention or denying female sexuality, we looked at it as Mary owning her body completely.
Oh, I
almost
love
the ultimate autonomy in a world where women rarely controlled their reproductive lives.
Yes.
What do you think? How does that land?
I mean, like, fucking mic drop is how it lands. I love that. And I'm so glad that you brought that up, because one thing that this relationship to men and how men define womanhood is a theme that I kept coming back to. Because as you kind of dive a little bit into the mythos around the archetype of Madonna, of course, you mentioned earlier the Freudian Madonna and the whore kind of complex, which is also in the Bible a little bit too, with Mary the Madonna and Mary Magdalene considered the whore, the prostitute, and we'll be getting into Mary Magdalene later in this series as well. But in that dichotomy, it is both of those definitions. Like, are you a Madonna archetype? Are you a whore archetype? Are you a maiden? Are you a mother? Are you a crone? All of these exist in relationship to men and have been assigned to women from men. Why does Freud get to decide what makes a Madonna and what makes a whore, right? And I understand that, like, the expertise and psychological backing and the theory, it's more nuanced than just that. However, there are so many women that are doing this work and understanding this research that we could look to for knowledge around female sexuality, around women's sexuality, that it still gets boiled down into your value to men is such a shame and really, really frustrating for women. I want to tell a quick anecdote within this, because I think it really illustrates just a commonplace thing that all women have likely experienced. In ninth grade, I switched schools to go to a different high school. And in English class, I forget what we were reading that day or why we got onto this topic. Oh, I remember what we were reading. We were reading Tess of the D'Urberville, which is a fascinating and horrifying book. read with caution if anyone is attempting to read. But we were discussing kind of maiden Madonna horror archetypes. And my English teacher, a grown-ass man who was married, had kids, had daughters of his own, had a lesson plan about how there are 3 types of women. There is...
Wow.
Right?
All right.
Yep. And the 3 types of women are the siren/succubus that eats men. We have the whore with the heart of gold, who you really want to date, but...
Oh, it's pretty woman, right? That's pretty woman right there.
It's Pretty Woman. And then you have the ice queen, who keeps her purity under lock and key. And you might have fun with the succubus, but you better be careful. You might fall for the whore, but you could never take her home to mom. And the ice queen is never going to have sex with you, but will be a really great wife. And I remember sitting here, like 14 years old, and just being like, what the fuck? Like, literally, what the fuck? And I was like, Mr. English teacher, I disagree. I think at this point in class, I literally said, what category would you put me into? How would you categorize me?
Wow.
And he kind of looked at me and was like, well, I don't want to comment on, like, you're my student, and, like, this is also about, like, sexual behavior. And I was like, no, you don't know the sexual behavior of any women that you are claiming to understand. How would you categorize me? I know probably, like, at that point in my life, Ice Queen would have been an easy one, but it's like, also, I had a boyfriend at the time, and I was a fun person and not just a studious girl, and I was really nice and warm, not just cold and off-putting because I wasn't, quote unquote, putting it out or whatever. And I'm like, no, look a woman in the eyes and categorize her. If you are going to sit there and say that, and he just flat out refused, and I'm like, you just undid your entire theory. Like, this is a horrific thing. And he really didn't like me. Throughout the rest of our English classes, it was a very Socratic seminar style class, which I enjoyed and learned a lot in this class through our disagreements. But I just will never forget that and remember feeling like this is a man in a position of authority who is educating young men that are sitting next to me. My boyfriend.
And young women at the same time.
Right. Right.
You know, and that's the thing. You were bold enough to actually, and that takes a lot of courage, by the way. I want to acknowledge that. Like,
I had a lot of
speak out like
as a young person.
I think I feel you still do. I don't know that that's gone away. In my opinion, I don't see how it could. But yeah, I mean, just the bravery there, and again, it just shows this idea of this idealization of the Virgin Mary is an impossible standard. When you elevate the perfect woman who can give birth without sex, what does that say? That all other women's sexuality is somehow tainted or wrong.
Yes.
So
yes.
It's a no-win situation. You're supposed to be a mother, but you're impure if you engage in the sexual activity necessary to be a mother. I mean, today, look at how culture judges women for their sexual choices, and they never hold men to the same standard.
Never.
And how
even,
much shame,
yeah.
how many centuries of shame around female sexuality are there because of this, just for centuries? And you know, I don't remember where I heard this and talking about how when a woman's eggs, right, are I think formed when they're a fetus and the eggs are created, they're sort of
yes.
they're baked, right? They're done. Those eggs are going to be with you for the rest of your life.
You're born
but if
with
you
your
think
number
about it,
of eggs, yeah.
You're born with your number of eggs, and which means you have them in your mother's womb, right? Which essentially means that there's 2 generations of because that egg was in your mother's womb. So essentially, the egg that would create your daughter was in your grandmother's womb, essentially. So you have this extra layer of generational trauma if you think about it from that. Whereas a man is you know, the Y chromosome comes from the male. Now, again, men are affected by their mothers, of course. So that same, that's how this generational trauma sort of bakes itself in. And
Yeah.
it's again, how do you change that? Well, you notice it.
Yes.
You notice it. I mean, everything starts with being aware and saying, and then making the decision that, you know what, I don't hold to this anymore. I'm not going to classify. And it does require a change in your thinking. It requires a change in my thinking as a man as well. And every conversation I have, everything I learn shifts how I view things just a little bit more and makes me more open to understand, to come to a place of I don't know, just I'm almost speechless for it, but just of understanding and compassion and also righteous anger. Like there's a part of me that gets just furious at things that I see. And when you bring them out to this light, it's crazy. And just even hearing your story about that English teacher, I mean, just shakes me up inside that somebody could say that and believe it. That's the worst part. Like there's a belief there.
Right.
And there's so few people willing to challenge that belief, but we're here to challenge it.
Yeah.
And, there's others like us who are here to challenge it. And I'm
100%.
I'm proud to challenge it.
Yes.
Because strong women are what build our society. Strong women are what are so needed. So rise up,
Yeah.
Anyway, that's my TED talk there. But.
Yeah, and a fabulous one it is. I completely agree. And just what you were saying about all of these expectations that are held to women that are never put back on men as well, right? It's like, have we ever heard of the 3 categories of men?
Right.
Like, no. I don't even know where I would begin to start with that, because one, I don't think any human being can be just easily and simply categorized. But there is this impossibility of womanhood that, even though I think as a society and through different phases of feminism and feminists that have come before us and fought hard to get us where we are, there is still the impossibility of be a mother, but also be a career woman, be a boss babe, but also nurture. And this duality that is quite impossible to give 100% to everything. But on top of that is not even an expectation that everyone wants to try and meet, right? It's like, not only is there this expectation that you're never going to be able to meet and fulfill, because sorry, you can't be a virgin and have birth. That just can't happen. But there is also the idea that that's what any woman would want anyways, that any woman would want to be CEO and soccer mom, that any woman would want to have all of these different things. It's like, you might, and that's beautiful, but you might also want to be a hermit in the mountains and write poetry, or be a farmer, and it's like there's so many different ways to express womanhood. And it is so often, even in our debates around feminism now, and when you hear, actually after our conversation about tradwives in a recent episode, I watched a Jubilee video on YouTube that is tradwives versus feminists, and I'm not a huge fan of Jubilee as an organization. I think there are a lot of issues with how they run things, so I'll just preface with that. But the conversation was so fascinating in that it really did boil down to like women arguing with each other about how to be a good woman. And I'm like, what are we doing? Like, truly, there is no way to be a good woman. There isn't. So let's just all be bad women.
Bad women make history anyway. But no, to your point though, even what you said, just to reflect on that, like, you want to be a CEO, want to be a mother, right? Just take those two. I mean, and everything in between. But
right.
If you want to be a CEO, then you have people on this side saying you're not a woman. You should be a mother. And then, we talked about the tradwives. Well, okay, they want to be a mother. Then you have people on this side saying you're wrong for wanting that. So, and then the idea that why are women where are the men? Like, why are women the one who have to carry the emotional burden of being emotional with the children. Like, how horrible to be boxed in a corner at every place. And how could you, how is a woman, or anybody, but how is a woman supposed to manage a career, have kids, but also do all of the emotional labor, in many cases do the vast majority of the chores, because that's not considered to be a man's thing.
Right.
And again, I know there are relationships that are different, and there are men that are different, and so I'm not denigrating or judging anybody, but again, it comes back to noticing and saying, why aren't men more emotional? Why, there's no emotional man stereotype. Or if it is, and if there is, that's negative. They're a beta, right? Or I don't know. They're not a Chad, and I don't even know what a Chad is. I'm a little too old for that. But whatever. There's negative connotations to it.
Yes, absolutely.
And again, it's just that when you notice it, what is wrong with wanting to both have a career but also be a mother? And why can't both of those two things be true? Why can't you have a career and be an incredible mother? Yeah. Without, and I don't know, it's society has boxed women in.
Yes. Well, and even within like have a career and be an incredible mother, I think there's immediately the archetype of those that pop to mind too, of like, boss babe, CEO, corporate America, and incredible mother is doing the bake sale, reading to her kids at night, singing lullabies, and head of the PTO. And it's like, actually, have a career and be an incredible mother are in and of themselves so nuanced and complicated. Like, incredible mother could be, how can you support your husband or your wife who stays at home? Incredible mother could be, I found the best childcare I could for my kids while I'm doing this other thing. Like, there is so many dimensions to mothering that aren't just, yep, I take my kid to every hobby and I taught them how to read before they went to kindergarten. And have a successful career can be working from home, setting your own schedule, traveling, being a CEO, or just having a hobby or a small business that you
selling
love.
Keychains on Etsy. Selling keychains on Etsy is winning. That's and again, I think it's because and maybe it's capitalism, maybe it's has defined, everything is transactional. So it's not about being, it's about doing. And I think
I'm so glad you said that, because I think within this, we talk a lot about the objectification of women, right? There's also a commodification of women. Marriage began as a transaction of property, right? You have dowry, you're exchanging goods. And even now, like, as a woman takes someone else's last name, if that feels empowering to you, absolutely, by all means, please do it. In the process of making this episode, I don't want to continue telling anyone how to exercise their femininity. But we can see how symbolically that has stood for this exchange of property. And when we look at women as Madonna or whore, that is not just objectifying them based on their sexuality, but it is evaluating them based on their worth. How much currency do I want to put in for this product? Because what if the product's damaged? What if the product has a few bumps and bruises? Well, maybe I'll just return it. Maybe I'll try it out and return it. But also, why buy the cow if you get the milk for free? Like, maybe I'll just get the milk for free, and then, like, you don't really need to buy the cow. John Mulaney has a wonderful bit where he talks about this horrible phrase, why buy the cow if you get the milk for free? And he says, because you love her. And it's like, yeah, it really is just that simple. And it is the paradigm shift of a woman is not a commodity. They are a human being. And we have been defined external to self, to what you can contribute to a man's life. And the wife, the Madonna, that people want to take home to mom are the ones that help them be an alpha, help them with their career, because there's a bunch of statistics about how married men do a lot better in business, right? Which makes sense because they don't have to worry about different things that you do when you're not partnered up. And again, I think we are moving in this path towards progress. And I'll also throw out there something I saw the other day. I may have already said it on another episode because I love it so much, but it's, you say not all men, but then you tell me you know how all men think. So like you said, we have to be thinking about these things and challenging it. And how do you challenge it? By bringing it to light, by bringing it to our awareness.
Yeah, by using your voice. And that's another interesting thing I'll point out. Throughout history, the powers that be, the authorities have emphasized these certain aspects of Mary while ignoring the ones we've talked about, the powerful aspects. For instance, they highlight her silence. I mean, she only speaks 4 times in the entire Bible. They highlight her obedience, her maternal self-sacrifice, and then said, these are the qualities you should emulate, women. I know medieval sermons praised Mary's humility while instructing wives to submit to their husbands. I mean, the pastoral epistles are all about women submit to your husbands, and women obey your husbands. It's all about obedience. It's all about submissiveness. Mm-hmm. And again, I argue, when you focus on her compliance instead of her courage, that's a tool of social control and really elevates this one view of femininity, which is a valid view of femininity, to be clear. There's nothing, I'm not trying to invalidate that, but it's just one view. But when you take this part and call it the whole, this is all it is, then we create that's how we got to where we are today.
Yeah.
But how do you change it? Well, you use your voice. Just as Mary used her voice in consenting. Mary used her voice in the song that she spoke, proclaiming and prophesying of social justice and equality. But if you don't use your voice, this is what we get, but by not using our voice.
Yeah.
So, and again, I'm proud to be part of what we're doing here. And I know we're, some senses, emptying out the ocean with small buckets, but that's okay. If enough people start doing this, the water level goes down a little bit, and we can't let perfect be the enemy of good, because every little, if we're able to reach a few people and a few more people and that's how things start, is by encouraging people to use their voice, encouraging women to use their voice, but also encouraging men to use their voice.
Absolutely.
And hopefully this is, this does that, and we can reclaim more and more power there.
Well, and I do think too, like you said, you mentioned this earlier, where are the men in this conversation? There does have to be a equal support in this work. And I think that's something you and I very intentionally kind of built into this podcast too, right? Is in our relationship and our dynamic really wanting to reflect this equality and equal respect. And I'm really grateful that we did that and that you brought such an openness to that. And I think too, there is just this almost misunderstanding within these dichotomies and these two sides kind of thing, right? That is, I'll go back to the video I was watching where the trad wives were saying, well, you want us all to have jobs. And the feminists were saying, well, you want us all to be mothers. And I think in reality, it's both of those groups are saying, this is what you say. And then both of them were like, that's not what I'm trying to say, right? So I think there is something really powerful in using our voice to speak up, but also lending an ear to women too. And that is a way that men can really actively do this work and support, is being a quality listening ear and then taking what you learn to speak up. And I love how you tied this back to Mary and that how her silence is really supported. And one of the things that makes her, you know, the perfect woman. But I'll go back to, in the very beginning, the oracle card that I got was the Virgo of Virgos. And the Virgo, yes, typically represents the virgin, represents the pure, also represents the harvest, the fresh new earth that we get to work in and play in because of the fruitful bounty that we have just collected. And that their silence is valuable because it creates a vacuum through which you can speak. And there is gratitude to be had there for the work that has been done, for the celebrating the things that have come before. And that is part of this archetype to me, and how I relate to the Virgo archetype in my astrology. Is it's not just about purity. It is about fresh starts. It is about opportunity. It is about rebirth, not just pure. Because what does that even mean?
Yeah, what is pure? Yeah.
Right.
You know. Very, yeah, no. And I think it's when you look at it that way, again, it shifts, it can shift something when you really just take it as that, you know, and I think the important thing, you know, you said how in this video you were watching, or how people are talking past each other. And I think it is important to listen as well. So to not assume what you want is what another person wants. So you motherhood, you want to be a mother, it's what you desperately desire. That's beautiful. And that's lovely. And if somebody else doesn't want that, they want to be a hermit and live in the woods, that's lovely, because that's what their calling was. And so it's when you assume that everybody has to have fit in that exact same box, that's you can be a square peg, but this is the hole this is the round hole you have to fit in. And we're all guilty of it.
Yeah.
Because sometimes we oftentimes we see things through our lens. And
yes.
and so there's parts of us that come up in judgment, but the more you sit with it, the more you educate yourself, the more you use your voice, but also listen as others use their voice, you just expand. And that's what we're about, is expansion. The more perspectives you get, the more views you get, the more you can synthesize and come up with your own and hold more space. Another interesting thing I think that we haven't touched upon yet,
please,
is comparing Lilith versus Mary. So the idea of Lilith versus Mary, the purity. So submissiveness versus independence, and how when Lilith was refused to be subordinate, when she flew away, she tradition basically turned her into a demon who threatens children and seduces men in their sleep. Then you have Mary, who's celebrated for her obedience. And to me, this contrast creates such a dangerous pattern. Women who follow the rules are saints. Women who demand equality are demonized. And, we see this. This is our difficult women, right? The difficult women. This contrast, to me, unfortunately reveals how religions have typically rewarded female submission while punishing autonomy. And I think we see that in everyday life. I don't know. How does that resonate?
Absolutely. I think even in that, like, Lilith and Mary are both of these biblical figures, and I think the dichotomy of one is quite literally demonized and one is sanctified, right? Like, literally in how culture and society has treated them. And I think I want to make something that's been the undertone of a lot of what we've talked about really explicit here, and saying that I think please don't let me put words in your mouth, but I think a lot of our personal issue with this is not even really in the mythos, is not in the archetype, but is in the way culture and society handles them and layers their lens on top of them, right? And that the Lilith story and the Mary story, to me, returning to them as an adult now who has been able to like you mentioned earlier, choose meaning for myself, make meaning for myself out of these things. They are both deeply empowering to me. And like I said, I have a very strong affinity for Mother Mary, despite all of these objections that I have to how her story has been handled. And looking at both of these women, mythological women, as an example of how society discusses women, I think is so powerful that it doesn't matter really what you do. Society will tell a story. That's what humans do. We're storytellers. And the stories that are told about women are so wrapped up in how they serve men, but also in their sexual purity. That really is like the two cross themes there. And so I think that's a really, really important point that you raise. I think too, I don't know if you have any maybe deeper knowledge on this, but one thing that I'm really thinking about is kind of the genealogy of Eve to Mary, because in the Bible, there is a moment, I'm forgetting where, but where Jesus's genealogy is listed, and it says that he relates back to Adam. So it would mean that he relates back to Eve as well, which would mean that Mary, his biological mother, likely would too. And so I don't know. There's something interesting about that to me, that Lilith was the first wife and Mary is potentially like a descendant of the second wife. I don't know. I'll just kind of... there's not a fully formed thought there.
No. Yeah. Both Matthew and Luke give distinct genealogies of the parentage and the lineage of Jesus. I think Matthew does it from the mother's perspective, if I'm remembering correctly. Matthew does it from the mother's perspective because Matthew was written to essentially as to proselytize to Jewish folks who were Jewish, and the mother's lineage is, again, from my limited understanding of genealogy, is what's important. Whereas I think Luke was more from the father's perspective, because Luke had a different purpose, was to a different audience, and so forth. I mean, what's really interesting, of course, though, is you go back to the mythos. Lilith and Adam were created at the same time from the same substance, whereas Eve was then created from Adam. And I mean, again, these are myths, right? But right. I mean, I would also state that Lilith as a myth predates, Eve as a myth, in some senses, because it's Lilith is known from Sumerian times, basically the earliest, written recorded history that we have. I mean, 3500 BC kind of thing. Whereas, the Genesis was, not written nearly that long ago, essentially, the creation story in the Bible. And I wonder what that says as well. So Eve is made from Adam, is basically taken from a part of Adam, and then that traces down to Mary, versus Lilith, who was not, was co-equal with Adam, and in some stories was actually before Adam, depending on again the myth you want to look at. It's also interesting that both are considered mothers. Lilith is often called the Dark Mother by individuals. So again, you have this dark, goes back to what we talked about a few minutes ago, the Black Madonna versus, the White Madonna, if you will. And so now you have the Dark Mother versus might not call Mary the Light Mother, but we're contrasting,
Right.
And what does that, I guess for you, what does that contrast mean? I'm curious, as a woman, what does, and you, as a woman with an affinity to both, how do you view that duality, or is it a duality?
I think from a linguistic perspective, I think duality is a really helpful term when we're discussing these things, because it's just easier to talk about symbols in that way. But largely, I'm attracted to multiplicity over duality, so I'll just preface with that, I suppose. But yeah, I think within this mythos of both of them being mothers, but like a dark mother that sacrifices her children within the mythos of Lilith, versus Mary, who sacrifices herself, her own safety, her own potential purity and reputation for motherhood of the Messiah. I think for me, it's important to hold both of these attitudes of sacrifice in different ways, right? That like motherhood is the ultimate sacrifice in so many ways. And I think that there's just so much asked of women. And we're seeing more and more women not wanting to have kids. And I think it is because there is this step into understanding of what that means. And I think that's a really, really good thing, a really powerful thing, because if you are going to have a child and raise a child, whether that's mother, father, with a partner, single, anything, that now becomes your priority. It does. And I think there's something so taboo about this idea of Lilith sacrificing her kids, but we applaud Mary for sacrificing herself. And I think being able to hold your shadow as something just as divine as your charity, your lightness. Yeah, I don't know. I think it really is just about trying to bring both into the conversation with one another and not letting them judge one another. Because I would like to think that if Lilith and Mary were in a room, they would have a lovely conversation, and Lilith may have a glass of red wine and Mary may have a cup of tea, but they'd be laughing and chatting and talking about how silly we all are down here, about how it's so weird the way we're talking about women, right? And I think thinking about both of those things within ourselves is really important, because I think oftentimes I'm quick to, oh, why are you putting so much pressure on yourself to be perfect and pure? Like, let that go. But then also judging the darker instincts, right? And it's like, what if they worked together? What if they supported one another? What if they actually weren't in contrast? Because you can't have one without the other. They actually necessitate one another. And if you need the other, like, you find holiness for both.
What if those darker instincts were necessary? Like, were taking you to the place you needed to be? Like, instead of trying to push them aside, they're there for a reason. And what if both, Lilith and Mary metaphorically are inside of us, right?
Yeah.
I mean, they're part of us. Both of these are inside of us. And one thing you said, just to backtrack a second, I this really struck me about motherhood. And if you really think about it, just what a sacrifice just becoming a mother is. You're basically, and we always focus on, here's the ultrasound, look at this. But really, there's a parasite grow. You've basically said, yes, I want a parasite to grow in my body. I know when, my mother said when she was pregnant with me, she used to eat fried chicken and all this stuff that basically you have this parasite in you that's taking over for 9 months. You try to push the parasite out and it wrecks your body, or you have to have surgery. How many, for centuries, pretty much for all of human existence, maternal death rates in childhood were incredibly high.
Yes.
Up through, even in some states today, like your home state, maternal birth rates are going, death rates are going up. Which again, but my point is what a sacrifice to become a mother. Like, men don't have any idea of the sacrifice, truly. And that actually just hit me as you were talking. Literally I never really thought about it in that way. So thank you for bringing that up, because what a sacrifice. Like, a guy would not do that. A guy would have a very difficult time if you said, hey, we're gonna inject this in you. You're going to gain all sorts of weight. Your hormones are going to go absolutely crazy. Oh, and by the way, you could die. And oh no, by the way, once you're done, no, you're not done. You've got 18 years or more that you have no idea what you're going to get when this is over. You have no idea what it's going to be, good, bad, whatever. Have fun. Like, that's literal. wow. I mean, just when you put, I mean, and again, I'm being a little tongue in cheek there, but I'm also not, because that's real. And so, I guess thanks, Mom. I guess it's something that I mean, for real, like that's what a sacrifice. And to all the mothers out there, you're beautiful, and what a sacrifice you've made. Whether you have one child, whether you have no children or whether you have 10 children, it doesn't matter. But what a sacrifice. And so thank you. Mother's Day is I think in our society, just sort of a something we do, but really every day should be Mother's Day when you look at it that way. Like, what a tremendous sacrifice. So I don't know where that came from, but you just sparked it, Reese. So.
No, I appreciate that. And I think that I appreciate your response too. I think it's something my different English teacher at a different high school said that he always got his mom a gift on his birthday. And I always loved that. And I'm like, I really need to start doing that, because my birthday is an opportunity to thank and glorify my mom, because my birthday is also the anniversary of this immense trauma that your mom went through, right? Like, birth is a huge trauma on the physical body, insanely traumatic to the body. Not to mention the emotional trauma. Postpartum depression is so real. Almost every single woman experiences it in some degree or form, and it hits so many different women so differently. And being able to really hold space for the negative aspects of that too. I mean, to link this back into our conversation about Lilith and Mary, it's like there is this beauty of giving birth, and like you said, the joy of like, oh, the ultrasound, and we get to take pictures of your beautiful pregnant belly, and you're glowing, and all of these gorgeous things. Also, you're gonna shit on the table when it happens. Like, you may need to cut open your entire body and see your guts in order to take it out. Also, you may have to make a decision between yourself or this other being at some point. And I think, not to necessarily veer too far off topic, but just to add this in as a piece of this conversation, there is the argument when you're talking about abortion that a lot of people say, well, only if there's a threat to the mother, right? Like, if there is a threat to the mother, then we can allow for abortion. Every pregnancy is a threat to the mother, period. Not only is it a sacrifice in life and energy, but it's quite literally putting your life on the line for the next 9 to 10 months and post-delivery. Like, it is insane to me that women elect to do this and then go through it again because of the love they have for creation, for their partner, for the world, for all sorts of things. It is a pure act of love. But that comes with deep darkness too. And there needs to be more talked about in the mourning period of birth, in the grief of birth, in the postpartum. You are departed from this thing that was attached to you. It is so grief ridden, even though it is a joyous, momentous occasion. There is also a death of something when your child is born. And both of those things are holy.
They are. That's so beautiful. Yeah. That is so beautifully said, I think. And I don't think we really consider that, this, and then I want, this being that's a part of you. I mean, literally a part of you, grew inside of you, is now outside of you. That separation. And also this, now you don't have control over that anymore. I mean, when a fetus is inside you, a mother, they have that, they're sort of in control. I mean, whatever control right. we have. But now the baby's born, you can't stop the baby from crying. I mean, you can nurture, you can comfort, but in the meantime, you're dealing with your own emotions, your own depression, your own. I mean, the hormones are going crazy, and then breastfeeding and all of these other. I mean, so much is just not really talked about. It's all what to expect when you're expecting, and that's the book. That's it. Yeah. But Wow, that's I don't know how we got to this area, but
I
it's
don't
so
either.
powerful. Well, Mother Mary, right? I mean, it is motherhood.
Yeah.
It's powerful.
Well, and
Yeah,
thinking about birthing and grief too, right? That like Mary has the ultimate grief in her son being the sacrifice, in knowing that she is raising a lamb to slaughter. That which makes me think of Severance, which we were talking about earlier.
yeah, we were talking about earlier.
But to be a mother, not only did Mary accept this, like you mentioned in the beginning of our conversation, with like radical consent to, yes, I will be this revolutionary. I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, but it was with the understanding that your son will be sacrificed, will be. I could be wrong about the actual verse there.
I'm not sure that it was, because I don't think the idea of the Messiah at the time was thought of as a sacrifice. Like, that would not have been, I don't think, a contemporary understanding so much. So
Sure.
But it brings up a great. I mean, they thought that the Messiah would be king and would conquer Rome in this case, and lead that from it was more of a political Messiah than a spiritual Messiah. But
Got it.
It does bring up the point of, she may not have known that when she had, because there's that Christmas song that you popped up in my head, "Mary, did you know?" sort of thing. That your baby boy would one day walk on water or whatever. But when he was being, in the story of the crucifixion, I mean, she's there, watching it as a mother. Whether she knew or not in the beginning, I don't know. But how was that for her there?
Yeah.
Like, what would it be like to see your promised child, dying? I mean, literally dying in a horrible, one of the most horrible methods of death, right? I mean,
Yeah.
So I think it'd be harder, actually. I mean, I almost hope she didn't know ahead of time. Like,
Yeah.
Because then to have to live with that your whole life seems even more horrific, frankly. Like, to know, I mean, right? So, but yeah, I mean, what a sacrifice there, too, to walk in her shoes as her son is walking to Golgotha to be crucified. Like, what an experience for and then, I know Jesus says, I think it's to John, maybe, John, this is your mother, this is your son, basically, before he dies, is like, take care of my mom, sort of thing. But, again, just what must be going, what would be going through your mind in that situation? I can't imagine, and I'm not a mother, but I can only imagine from the perspective of my daughter. Like, I don't know how my heart would handle that.
Yeah.
I don't,
Yeah.
And nobody knew that he was going to rise again, right? I mean, that's the thing. Like, in that moment, right, that's final, right? It's death. He was dying. He died. So yeah, I think it's super powerful though and again, I think that's neglected as well. How Mary would have felt with that, to have her baby boy crucified. That sounds terrible. I mean,
My
more than
gosh,
terrible.
it like sprung some tears to my eyes when you were describing it earlier. I don't have any kids of my own, and I do think that that's something, at least in my limited understanding, since I don't have kids, but it's a type of love that you don't understand until you're there, right? Until you have it, and it's completely different. So this is a very minimal kind of subsection, but I'm like, to think of like one of my best friends or my dog, who is like the closest stand-in I have to a child, even that, like the idea of just grieving that is so heartbreaking. And to think that it's on this grand scale in such a public way, it really is like the coming together of Lilith and Mary and all of these things, and holding both of them and making space for both of them to not just be a yin and a yang that kind of nestle together, but they can mix up and be gray, right? Like to make some new beautiful configuration that makes sense for you, listener, for whoever, right? One
Truly.
other thing that is kind of a random tidbit, but I wanted to throw out there, is also the idea that Jesus had siblings. It's a not very often mentioned thing, but it is something that we get in the text, and I think it just adds another layer to this idea of Mary's purity, that it's like, okay, even if she was a virgin when she had Jesus, she had sex at some point. there were other kids. And so I think that's just another interesting like nuance to this whole thing. But as we kind of near towards the end of our conversation, Dennis, what does Mary mean to you? How would you define the Madonna archetype for you in light of our conversation, but also who you are as a person and in this work that means so much to you?
Oh, that's a great question, and it's definitely one that'll probably change over
Of course.
over time as I reflect more, and probably throughout the course of our conversations. I think it'll. But I think for me the biggest thing was or my key takeaway was number one about just thinking about motherhood. It really oddly that. I mean, maybe shamefully, I don't know, but certainly oddly, not really realizing just how big of a sacrifice that really is. Honest, that was one takeaway. Not necessarily having anything to do with Mary, but just in general, that was actually interesting that hit me so strongly. But I also think just the idea of reframing Mary as a powerful voice, and showing how brave she was. And we talk a lot, I think, about safe spaces, creating safe spaces. And I think that's well and good. But what we really, I think, should be creating is brave spaces. Because Mary was brave. She wasn't in a safe space. Like, there wasn't a safe space. She was in a brave space.
Yeah.
Everything she did was brave. And I think we've forgotten that, or maybe never even realized it. It's been hidden. So for my takeaway is to try to create an environment where women and men, but women especially, can be brave. That there's the opportunity to because women are brave every single day. Every single time you walk out into the world, you are brave and you are powerful and you are perfect. But it takes bravery to do that every single day. And I think, to me, this conversation has allowed me and given me more clarity into just how much bravery it takes to be a woman in today's world. And so I appreciate the dialogue, and I appreciate the back and forth, because I'm so glad you're brave, and I'm so glad our listeners are brave, and I just encourage ever more braveness, I guess, bravery and courage, because it's what the world needs today. How about you, Reese? What do you take away?
I think what you said about Mary, this being not not an act of submission, but of radical acceptance and ownership, I think is so powerful in reframing the Madonna. What if we could look at purity not as sinless, sexless, but as autonomy, to be full of oneself, to be whole in and of who you are. Like, that to me is what I would like to kind of shift my idea of purity to be. That is, I am untainted by anyone else, in the sense of no one else's opinions, no one else's judgment, no one else's path. It is my choice, my soul, my purpose that I get to drive me forward. And in that way, my path is pure, because it is just mine. And I think that really is the duty that we all have as scholars, as feminists, as Christians, as Bible readers, to allow Mary to have that type of purity. Any literature shifts and changes with who reads it and who interprets it. That's the beauty of art. And my Mary that I interpret is going to be that one from here on out. And I think really being able to subvert the expectation of the impossible woman into the impossible woman. It's not the impossible woman of virgin mother, but the impossible woman of brave, of full of yourself, of revolutionary. Yeah, that's the kind of impossible woman that I want to step into, that Mary represents. And I really
love that.
Again, yeah, and I so appreciate all of your thoughts and specificity rooted in the text as well. I think that's really so important. And I think, at least for me, I can feel your deference and respect for the Bible. I hope that our listeners can feel that from both of us as well, that as two people who no longer consider ourselves Christians, still hold the Bible as an important thing, as a divine thing. And yeah, I'm excited to continue this with you and with your thoughts.
I don't know where we'll go, but I love the pure. I love the idea of being pure in the sense of you're purely you. That's the purity. You are pure, not to some abstract view of pure, but you're purely who you are.
Yeah.
And the impossible bravery that you show every single day when you get up and you walk and you do and you be, that is purely you, and no one else could ever be you. And every listener, you are perfect. Again, that's pure, perfect, wonderful, and brave. And so, yeah, this is exciting. I can't wait to see who we're going to do next. It'll be a surprise because we haven't really planned on
no, we haven't.
Our next figure. Maybe we'll go back to the Old Testament. I don't know. We'll see. It'll be fun.
Maybe I'll post a poll on Instagram. This probably won't come out before we record the next one, but yeah, how does it sound to you if I post a poll and see if there's a figure that people are most excited to listen to?
Okay. Love it.
Yeah, that sounds great. I'm so excited too. I think this is such a wonderful thing that we're doing. Yeah, it's great. It's
really cool to just dive in a little bit and think a little bit differently, and I've learned a lot. So I hope our listeners have as well. I trust they will. And awesome. Well, thank you, Reese. As always, it's such a pleasure.
Yes.
And we will see you next week.
Bow Down is a weekly podcast from the Cohere Collective that explores esoteric and empowered feminism.
Please subscribe to Bow Down wherever you may be listening. And if you enjoyed the episode, please leave us a like, a 5-star rating, and a review. And if there's anyone you think would enjoy this episode, or maybe just needs to hear it, please share it.
If you want to stay up to date on all things Bow Down, you can follow the Cohere Collective on any social media platform at the Cohere Collective, and check out other content and offerings at www.thecoherecollective.com.
If you're interested in working with Reese to find and pursue your purpose, I encourage you to head to www.thecoherecollective.com/life-coaching.
If you're interested in working with Dennis to shed your mask and embrace your desires, you can email Dennis at dennis@theheartstoybox.com.
A huge thank you to Jack Corbett for Bow Down's music. You can find him on Instagram at j.corbe. Thank you all for joining us today. We're so glad you're here.
And as always, we hope you feel like you are living more coherently. And until next time, love.